hear me? Is it on? You guys hear me now? Okay, cool. Hey, Rob. I'm Frannie Kelley. I'm the co-host and the sorry, I'm Frannie Kelley. I'm the co-host and co-founder of Microphone Check. Um, with Ali Shaheed Muhammad of A Tribe Called Quest. He has a lot of jobs, actually. He couldn't be here because he's premiering the score of Luke Cage in LA, which he composed. So I'm also a professional broadcaster, and in that capacity, am a member of SAG-AFTRA. I'm from a union family, and so that's always been a point of pride for me, and I feel close to my relatives, actually, knowing that I'm a union member. And SAG-AFTRA also, I benefited from one of the contracts that they negotiated recently, and they really represented me, and so I'm grateful to them. But I didn't know that much about my union, actually. And I recently learned that one of the great benefits of SAG-AFTRA is if you are a musician and you're signed to a label, a major, or any one of, I think it's more than 600 indies or boutiques, you have health insurance for you and your family. They also contribute to your retirement fund, and all that is non-recoupable. I don't know any musician who knew that. And so part of what, I think why SAG-AFTRA is putting on this event and why I'm so happy to do it is because we want to tell people that that's going on. And it's great. So as part of that, we want to say a big thank you to Rebecca Damon, SAG-AFTRA Executive Vice President, and also to SAG-AFTRA Sound Recordings. So thank you. Thank you for doing this. And with that, let's welcome Ninth Wonder. Are you going to be better at the mic than I am?
I'm not sure. I'm not.
Yes. Yes, yeah. The answer is yes. So I wanted to open by sort of talking about a quote from Professor Marcy Morgan in about the middle of the film. This is what she said. She said that the African diasporic and particularly African American culture count on the DJ, quote, to help us remember the beat, the moment, the community, no matter what it is. We expect the DJ to be able to contextualize that music for us, to put it in a space so that not only can we never forget it, but we just never forget who we are. That's a lot of pressure. When did you first realize that that was your responsibility?
I'm not sure when I can remember when it was my responsibility. Well, I'll speak on the standpoint of I come from a generation of hip hop as a fan and a listener where skill was a responsibility, right?
Uh-huh.
And knowing the craft, money was an afterthought when it started in the 70s. We didn't think that it was going to become a business until nobody did until, a lot of record companies counted it out. Even when Rappers Alike came and The Messenger, even before that, King 10 the Third by Fatback Band. When that stuff came along, record labels didn't think it was going to be anything. It'll be gone. It'll be a phase. It'll be out. So by the time we get to 1987, when Yo MTV Raps was the #1 show on MTV, right? Because I start speaking to a generation to be in that number of the Public Enemies and the LL Cool J's and the Beastie Boys and the Salt and Peppers and the Queen Latifahs and all of the people that was, around when I was in middle school. it required a skill. And if you have a skill that has some type of discipline and responsibility to it, right? So I guess for me, if I felt like I want to be a part of it, I had to have the skill, which came along with, responsibility. But if we talk about knowing each other through African diaspora, like the DJ in the 70s was just a messenger, right? If we go back to 1400s, 1500s, 1600, west coast of Africa, we start talking about bar traditions and griots and true speakers and stuff like that. If we start talking about that, then it was up to that true speaker to be able to tell what was going on in his or her village, right? And that started at age 13. And in order to get that position, it was a responsibility to hold some type of, to be able to speak out.
To have authority.
Right. And to tell the stories of your village or your tribe or whatever it was. Then that carried on to on the slave ships when it was usually some African on the slave ship that knew all of the tribes' languages that could be able to tell everybody how to stay alive. That's a responsibility as well, right? So then if we get to plantations, then we start talking about spirituals, right? And gospels and somebody had to be the one to say, okay, in the morning we're running, okay? So be outside or not. That was pretty much it. I don't think people know that Harriet Tubman, if Harriet Tubman thought somebody in her party was afraid, she'd shoot him. Right? That takes some type of responsibility and skill. But it's a skill I don't have. But at the same time, if we continue on, if we go to Scott Joplin, if we get to Duke Ellington, if we go to James Brown, if we go, these people are messengers for what was going on around them socially. And I think that's a part of the African diaspora music. We try to make sure that we do things that's going on around us socially, what's going on in the music. But some people will argue that's kind of lost now. But at the same time, that's when I realized that I'm just a long chain of messengers, right?
Do you know when and why it was lost? Sorry.
No, I mean, sometimes money, sometimes chance, sometimes, I can't, and this is probably going to get into conversation about young generation of hip hop versus the older generation. I can't knock a kid for trying to create a better situation for his or her family.
Yep.
We don't know the situations these kids come from, right? And we also need to understand some of the music that they make that we may or may not like is a form of therapy for them because they don't get a chance. We really downplay the idea of mental illness, right? Especially when it comes to kids, like kids coming up, you got internet everywhere. They're seeing all these images. All of the images are not high quality of information. So we don't know what that does to a kid's brain. I have a class full of them sometimes that, that may be the case, right? So I can't blame a kid what he and she wants to talk about in their music now because then it may be their form of frustration to getting things off, right? But at the same time, sometimes the powers that be take advantage of that. That's the biggest difference, and maybe, that's how it got to the point where it's like things started to really change.
Well, and sometimes, hip hop is youth culture. We kind of value the young phenom and the prodigy, but sometimes early success can be a curse. People will want you to keep making the same thing over and over again, so people copy your trend. Do you think there's any way for a musician to kind of go in with their head up, knowing that that there are lots of ways for them to get painted into a corner?
It depends on if somebody decides to put them on the path. If that musician is surrounded by people that wants to help instead of hurt, that some people are surrounded by people that only sees that person as a commodity. right? And sometimes that can be, that can be harmful to that
Yeah.
person without the proper saying, okay, you need to do this and you need to do that. That goes for anybody. It goes with whether it be entertainers, athletes. We've seen this over and over and over. Politicians, we've seen this over and over. So I think that's the issue, that we're not, especially with our young musicians, we're not pointing them in the right direction. And the way we try to do it is the wrong way.
What do you mean by that?
We try to write them off from from the start, right? Which is not a great communication tool.
We try to tough love.
We try, well, not only that, we just try to say what you listen to is garbage.
Yeah.
Like, bottom line, whether we like it or not, right?
Yeah.
Like when I was 13 years old, I liked Slick Rick, right? Still love Slick Rick, right? My aunts and uncles liked the OJs. Okay. And when I'm in my room listening to the Great Adventures of Slick Rick, I didn't want to hear your family reunion song. I didn't want to hear, Darling, Darling, Baby. I didn't care. You understand?
Yes.
Like, and I think sometimes we forget that when we tell a kid, oh, you need to respect Biggie Smalls. Like, we kind of forget that we were once in that place. That we were once in the place of, and then we expect them to know. We expect them to know things 20 years prior to them. And then we say, well, they got the internet. Well, their upbringing and our upbringing is two different things. Some of us grew up with 5 channels. Right? How many people in the room can remember TV going off at night? When you say that to a bunch of kids, no, TV going off, what does TV going off mean, right? What does that mean? Like, I get a classroom full of kids. When I say television went off, they say, what does that mean? So I'm explaining this. So we have to understand the information they're receiving on a day-to-day basis is at an all-time high. It's very fast. There's 1,500 channels on TV. There's Sirius satellite radio. A lot of radio stations, FM dial, AM dial. They got a phone with 500 apps on it. That's a lot of information that kids are getting, as opposed to our prehistoric 5 stations and 1 radio station that's telling us, this is it. We take for granted of us all being in the house at the same time, looking at TV at the same time. We really take that for granted, like, and we take for granted that, some of us can remember Michael Jackson throwing the hat off the stage in Motown 25 in 1983. But at the same time, there were some kids that didn't get to see that. They were stuck in the car with their mom and dad on the way home and didn't get to see it, right? Now kids they could just freeze time almost and choose exactly what they want to see when they want to see it. So with all that chaos, you might not know Biggie Smalls. You might know Biggie and Tupac because they now got T-shirts in Walmart, right? But you don't know the songs unless it's a circumstance of chance or somebody put you on the path.
Well, so you talk to undergrads a lot, both at Duke and at this class at Harvard.
And North Carolina Central.
And North Carolina Central,
right.
Of course. Do you ever butt heads with some kids? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some kid will come up to you and tell you you're wrong.
Yeah, all the time. Especially when it comes to the sampling part. That's the thing that's funny. Like,
you mean because they just didn't know?
They just didn't know, And when I first started to teach, I would, when a kid comes out their mouth and says something crazy, you have to kind of play it down. Like, well, why do you think that is? You can't say, "Are you stupid?" Like, you can't. You try so much, But it's tough. But you have to. You have to hold back.
You should teach a class in that.
You have to hold back. Prime example. And I have to, because I don't want to turn that student away. I want them to listen to what I have to say. And like we talked about upstairs, it might be 10 students in the room that feels exactly this one student does, but that student was brave enough to open his or her mouth. So now, me teaching this one student is going to teach the rest of them at the same time. But the rest of them are going to say, I'm glad ain't open my mouth because he looks stupid. You know what I mean? So I butt heads a lot with students because they're coming in the classroom with the idea of they know hip hop already. Right. And so by the time they leave, by the time second day is over, they're like, I know absolutely nothing. I know nothing. So, you know, it's always a good teaching moment when I butt heads with a student.
I mean, it's not that dissimilar from what happens on Twitter. Like somebody will say something, we'll all sort of watch the reaction. I mean, it's been a while since I was in college. I wasn't like in class all that often. Are there things that some parts of it were good?
I wasn't even.
Right, okay. Right, well, maybe, had I had you as my teacher, I would have showed up. But I remember classroom discussions being kind of tough because people kind of are performative about things. They're like showing off a little bit, whatever. Are there good habits of learning that are happening in a college setting that we can cultivate? And also in teaching. I mean, you're so reasonable when you argue with people. And you probably convince far more people than I do when I just like cut them out of my life completely. Yeah.
I think so. I think we really downplay the idea of when kids debate in class, and get to arguing. That's a good thing for me. When they
arguing with each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Because at least they're not doing this.
Yeah.
Right? They're understanding the idea of how to be social without their phones.
Wow. Okay.
Right? And that's important because I think slowly but surely, although new music is the way it is, although texting is the way it is, we're losing the idea of the power of words. And so we got to, understand that if my students are engaging in an argument, I let them, because at least it's doing two things. It's teaching them how to communicate, and it's teaching them how to critically think. Because if anybody in this room that's in education, they just teach them how to test, and that's it. Learn, regurgitate for the test, and that's it. But there's no critical thinking, when it comes to certain students. A lot of students, it has to be some special high-level class, or you had to pay, to go to this training program or something. But your average kid is not taught how to think critically. So I use my classroom for that as well. An exercise that I do, which this always solves how many hip hoppers we got in here. Because hip hop is now, when we say hip hoppers, that's not 18 years old. It'd be somebody in his 55 that loves hip hop too. Okay? But the difference is people that don't understand hip hop, they don't understand that we all don't like the same hip hop. You like Soulja Boy? No. No diss. I just don't.
Soulja Boy Internet's gonna come for you now.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, what I'm saying is, but if you ask his fans, do you like Pete Rock or do you like A Tribe Called Quest or do you like Big Daddy Kane? No. We're not a monolith, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
So I do this exercise in my class. And this is how I solve the argument of the greatest MC with this generation, right? So I asked them about the NBA. How many, and I say this to them all the time too, Google, learn how to seek stuff. So somebody tell me how many Hall of Famers in the NBA. And they give me a number. How long has it been around? And they give me a year. I do the same thing in the NFL, Major League Baseball. Each one has about 200 to 300 Hall of Famers. NFL is almost 100 years old. NBA is 94, whatever. Major League Baseball, same thing. I said, okay. So that means in order for you to get a bust, a gold jacket, or speech, you had what's the qualifiers? And we talk about the qualifiers or whatever. So then I asked them, okay, so now we're about to do this for hip-hop. I want you to write down your top five rappers now. Don't think about it too hard, just write. So they write down, can we write 10? Fine, write 10. So they write 10. So then they write 10. I say, okay, We're now the committee for the Hip Hop Rapper MC Hall of Fame. We're the committee. What's the qualifiers? So they say, oh, you got to have flow, you got to have storage, you got to have a discography, you got to have beats, fashion, swag, and that's about 9, 10, maybe 14 categories we end up with. I said, okay, if we order for you to get in, how many do you have categories you have to have down? 9. You had to have 9 to get 9 out of 14. Fine. Now look back at your paper. You start to see students. Because it puts the decision in their hands. It's not me saying, this is the greatest, he's the greatest, she's the greatest. You made up the rules. This is your rubric that you came up with. This is your standard. Now, what does it say about some of the rappers you like? So it puts them in that. Now they feel some type of way.
It ended up being harsh, man. It wasn't expected.
But I didn't do it. They did it. So that's kind of like the way I solved that problem. But again, it puts it back in their hands, though. I don't try to preach to them who's the best. I try to lay out, let's figure out the standard, and then we make our decision from there.
Again, I wish I could take your class. I'm very, very interested in what this film says about higher education and hip hop. Higher education on its own, hip hop within it, how that maybe is related to like the history of jazz studies programs.
Right.
And then sort of, I guess the biggest picture though is teaching as an element of hip hop, maybe the foundation. You have worked in many different types of institutions, taught students who attend different types of institutions, differently funded, differently focused. You also note in the documentary that it isn't historically black colleges and universities that are putting the hip-hop archives into their programs or building them. Can you talk a little bit about why that might be happening?
And Infante spoke about it too in the film.
Okay, yeah.
We have a hard time, we as meaning black folk.
Okay.
We have a hard time being first about us.
Okay.
And what I mean is, some of us have the idea of saying, why do you need to tell me about being black? I'm already black. Like, you know what I mean? And that comes to our history and everything else. So we have a hard time being first in line for that. Something that we had a very big hand, and it wasn't us by ourselves. This the thing about hip hop. Although it comes in the line of messages from Africa, it's still, we didn't build hip hop by ourselves. Right? No way, shape, or form. Us and Latinos built it together. Right? So, but we have a hard time like being first. I don't need you as a I'm sitting there trying to tell you like this is a progressive art form. Turn off TV. That's not telling you what hip hop really is, and you turn your nose up to it at some HBCUs. But then when Hamilton turns into a play, I get a call. Did you see Hamilton?
Did you?
Right. Which is a fantastic idea, right? Which came out to be dope as well. But the thing about it is like we look for the wrong things to validate.
Yes.
And I say that was the wrong thing, but that shouldn't be the validation point. That's what I'm trying to say. It should be validated way before that. Way before that. Not as hip hop as being a genius, but hip hop has created entrepreneurs. It saved lives. Like, the media still talks about, to this day, 20 years later, Jay-Z still being a dope dealer. What? Like, I don't get that. Like, well, former drug dealer. Yeah, 96, 95, 94. It's 2016. This man is on a part of a team. I mean, what are we talking about at this particular point? But we just look for the wrong things to validate us. So I think that's what it is when it comes to HBC or any school. Like we need to really jump on this thing now because this can be the thing to educate your kids and get their attention. Right? My class is a hip hop class, but it's really not a hip hop class. It's a life class. That's what it is. I'm trying to get that kid to think critically about themselves. I'm just trying to use something that they know very well and they feel like they're attached to do it. So that's what it is.
Well, and also, I mean, hip hop is often is resistant to the exact like forms of authority and institution that colleges are,
Right.
especially for-profit colleges. I can, it's not that hard to understand why it's like it's taking a while. Um, Another thing that's easy to understand is there are a lot of archives moving into universities. I guess most recently, Bill Adler's went into the Smithsonian, Michael Holman's went to the New York Public Library. There's the Cornell one,
That's the Harvard one
the
and
Harvard
Cornell, right?
one. There's some is Virginia Tech.
Right.
Oh yeah, Tulane also. Do you have any sense of like the shared characteristics of those places?
I have a high respect for the ones that wants to take the time to archive what we've built.
Yeah. Do you think it is like it has to be a person like Professor Morgan who just sees the value, sees the need?
I
the
think
demand?
so. I think, hip hop is one of those things that we are very protective about who handles these things for us.
Right.
And at the same time, we don't necessarily want people in it, especially now doing that. We've already opened the floodgates for people that want to be in the hip hop culture, especially want to be in hip hop culture or the industry who cares nothing about the music. We've let so many people in for that. Now, when it comes to like the education and the preservation of it, the history of it, that's when we really need people to care about exactly what. And it's wide open, but Cornell has a great archive. Harvard has a great archive. We're building one in North Carolina Central. Duke is building one of, different media sources. I think, at Harvard is, videotapes and artifacts. At Cornell, it's like the original flyers from like 1980, 1981, right? But they're sitting right beside a vault. They're sitting in a vault right beside one of the original copies of the Gettysburg Address.
Amazing.
Right. Because this is as much as a time piece period as this. So, and they're looking at it that way. But there's been a lot of DJs and producers and hip and rappers that I also have looked at it that way, but hadn't taken the steps to make it an institution. That's what it is.
So is there any possible downside?
It's always a possible downside when it comes to falling into the wrong hands. We're getting a lot of people in hip hop. Hip hop doesn't have a PhD. You get your PhD,
right?
In a college, in a college quote unquote sense. Right. There are certain things it's called professors at practice, right?
Oh, okay.
We have plenty of those. Well, in the new thing in universities is you have life experience. You're a professor at practice.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, as far as I'm concerned, we have plenty of those in hip hop. Chuck D, Too Short, a lot of them that are professors at practice, right? That we affectionately call our OGs, right? But at the same time, they have years and years of experience where you want to sit down with them and learn with them what mistakes to make, what not to make, So it's very important that, things don't fall into the wrong hands, because now you got a lot of professors going into hip-hop academia. They only heard 2 rap albums in their life.
Like who? What?
Right. I mean, it's a thing, because now it's the hip thing to do. It's the cool thing to do. And they get in, they write a lot of books, and they say this, and I say, well, can you name Tribe's first 3 albums? Before Love Movement? What about the first 3? The one with Bonita Applebaum on. You don't need to be in this. Like you don't. You need to be able to speak. You cannot get into it. You cannot become a jazz professor without being fluent in it. You can't teach Spanish. You can't teach the Spanish Armada if you don't know Spanish. You can't. So in order for you to teach hip hop to the next generation, and if I say Cool G rapper DJ Polo and you say, who is that? Oh no, you don't need to be in this. That's just bottom line. And there's a lot of professors right now that's getting in this that knows nothing about the music. They're just getting in it for personal gain, and it's like, no.
That is really crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, there is no hip hop studies like performance program, is there?
I think it's a few. Yeah, not
Really?
performance. I think there's a music industry programs around the country that's being built. There are probably hip hop dance programs as well.
Okay, yeah.
Right. There's some classes. There's an art of turntables classes in certain schools. I teach beyond the beat. I teach a production class at Duke. Right. One of the classes I teach at Duke is a production class. So I mean, there are certain.
Right, there's the Clive Davis School at NYU.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's growing. I think. But it's being taught by the practitioners of the culture, like it's being taught by us.
But it seems to me that the way hip hop thinks of itself, a lot of the skills that are valued can't be taught in a classroom setting. But are there ways that if you were to like devise a hip hop performance program, where they're like, are there classes that you would teach or classes you would be like, you either got it or you don't?
I mean, it's like with the DJing. I think DJing is the best example, and I think we've all been a victim to this, of the person who decides they want to become a DJ tomorrow. You can hear it. Like you can hear a person that just started DJing because since the technology is easy, I can just run out and get, you're right. But you have to know the speed of records, the years of records, which records goes together, which doesn't. That's something you can't really teach. Same thing with production, same thing with sampling. You can get all the equipment you want. It all falls down when you drop the needle on the record and you listen. That's it. That separates everybody. So it's certain things that you can't teach. You can't teach what Nas does. You can't teach it. You have to be born with the skill to put words together that way.
Yeah, right. I mean, Nas, who didn't graduate from high school and wrote Illmatic when he was 16,
right.
17. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's funny because we're talking about hip hop being a part of academia in the Ivory Tower and all that.
Talking about hip hop being genius.
Right, but we're also talking about hip hop being genius, like like regardless of all of these institutions.
Exactly.
Like, with zero help, with like less than zero help. Them telling people that they're not smart enough, they haven't read enough, they don't know how it works.
Exactly. And it's to the point now, hip hop is, by date is what, 43 years old. It's a deep art form, right? And we talk about Nas not finishing school, like he's a genius in his own right because, again, to put together that type of composition when you're 16 years old, to have that much thought process of what the world, because he wrote Illmatic looking out his window,
right,
and hanging around his. That's how he wrote it. If you read it on paper, you would think that's coming from a 28, 29-year-old man. The way
a trained poet.
Right, a trained poet with syllables and iambic pentameter and stuff they teach you in music. He's doing that on his own, right? In today's time, a kid that they would try to put him on some type of medication, saying he was, ADHD or something like that. But that, I think he was also trained a lot by his father. Olu Dara was a jazz musician. Saying
his mom made him read everything.
Exactly. It was a different type of education. Sometimes, schools, it depends on the school. If it hurts a kid or helps a kid, just period. So he was a kid that he felt like I really don't need it. This particular school, the education they're giving me, I don't. And now we have Nas, right? Which is one of the greatest poets of our time.
And didn't he get an honorary degree from Harvard, or does he have a
Not,
chair?
no, the Nasir Jones Fellowship is the fellowship that I have. The fellowship was named after him. So, because the person that helped the Hutchins Center was a fan of Nas, right? You know,
Chance.
we have to start looking at that too. You know what I mean? Like some of these kids that we go perform for in school and at a college, where later on they're going to become CEOs of companies and things like that, and they love your music so much, and it formed them in a certain way that they want to let's name a building after you, man. You know what I mean? And that's what happens, and the fellowship was named after him.
Maybe in some ways it is sort of a natural that the institutionalization, in a positive sense, of hip hop culture
Right.
is happening as it was always going to.
Exactly. I think so. Again, it's going to be a yin and yang to everything. It's going to be this side working against it, and sometimes we pay too much attention to this side that's working against it, and not enough attention to the ones that's like trying to push the culture forward, like every day. The Shanti Dasses, the David Banners, the Young Gurus, Ali Shaheed Muhammad's, right? The Chuck D's. They're trying to push this thing forward in different spaces, right? The Timothy Ann Burnsides, who huge and instrumental for getting all of us in the new Smithsonian. Those people are trying to push the culture in a way that it can stay around forever.
I just wanted to say it's every time you list people, you're like, you make sure you list women in there. And thank you for doing that. I have so you are colleagues with Professor Mark Anthony Neal.
Yes.
And the section of the documentary when he's talking about knowledge coming out of like poverty-stricken circumstances,
right?
But also that it's kind of it's knowledge that is in some ways repeated, like it's knowledge that we all kind of learn at different stages of our lives over and over. But it's the stuff that bears repeating. Maybe it's the stuff that can't be taught, that you just have to learn on the job. Are there any of those types of knowledge that you think are crucial, is crucial that they be passed on? Like, what do people really need to know in your capacity as a teacher?
My mom has taught kindergarten for the past 40 years.
My mom teaches 2-year-olds.
Right. And I think that's an instrumental time. And I remember a long time ago, she had this like a poster that said, "All I really needed to know, I learned in kindergarten." Have you ever seen this?
I have, yeah.
And it's just that basic principles of life that somehow, some way, people have forgotten along the way. No, please, and thank you, like stuff like that.
Sharing.
Right, share. We kind of forgotten some of this stuff. The older we get, the meaner we get, I guess. I don't know. But, I guess that's what it is, that we kind of hold on to some of that stuff. But the thing about it is those principles was also in the music, though. Okay. Especially in, like, older, like, 70s soul. That's the rule book. 70s soul and like soft rock, yacht rock too. It's the rule book for life, right? It's like you can get everything you need from 70s soul, 70s music. everything.
So like Michael McDonald is.
Man, listen.
Um, and how does that relate to this? You know, the concept of I think it was Professor Gates who was talking about this, the repetition with the difference. That's fascinating.
That is crazy. For them
That's
to come
like
up with that
it.
so fast in like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Man.
And that's like when you're talking about people listening to R&B and putting it in hip hop, and then the way that kids today they're talking, they're using their grandparents' music
Right.
in some ways, or they're like using it, but they don't know. They don't know who made it. They don't know what they're using.
Everything, we talk about academia. Everything is validated through literature, right? Writing, and trying to validate things through sound can get kind of tough, even to make up the rules of what the standard is. But one thing he did say, he said, he came to me and said, like, Knife, listen, like, you have to understand, like, you are taking records and introducing them to a new generation. You're sampling, but at the same time, if you are a college student and you get your master's and your PhD, and you end up teaching school yourself, all your notes and everything you teach the way you teach has been sampled from every professor you sat down in front of.
That's awesome.
You know what I mean? Like no idea was completely your own. Right. It may be your rendition of it, but it's not your own. And that's called, we call it literary license, right? To be able to, or sometimes intellectual property, right? To take somebody else's idea and turn it into your own, right? That's sampling within itself. But when we take songs to do it, is wrong. Although the difference is, this professor may not credit his previous 10 professors.
Right.
When we sample a record, right, for a majority of us, and we clear the sample for the world to hear, not only are we clearing the sample, but at the same time, this particular artist that we sample, we may extend their shelf life.
Right. You put some money in their pocket, too.
Right. And turn a new kid on to them. Like when I sample a record, and even if it's a sample, because all producers don't clear samples, and maybe not saying that. But at the same time, it's the idea of the dig and the search for it. So if I sample a record on YouTube, 9 times out of 10, some bright guys put the group that I sample on the side of the choices, right? You're on YouTube so long, you click, keep clicking over. You're like, how in the world did I get on this YouTube page? This is not where I started.
Called a wormhole, yeah.
Right. So if I sample, say for example, Little Brothers Loving It, I sampled One Night Affair by Stylistics, right? So that song's on YouTube. The Stylistics records are all down the side. If I'm a kid and I click over, that kid is listening to the Stylistics records all day long, right? And so that's kind of like, it rejuvenates. But the artists that understand that are the Roy Ayers of the world, right? Who comes to the hip hop show, and stands in the back while P Rock or DJ Premier or somebody is DJing. He stands in the back like a god, like, I'm started all of this, right? And we respect him as such. You know what I mean? The Roy Ayers, the James Browns, if he was still alive, the Herbie Hancocks, who has a great relationship with us, right? That's how we keep the bridge. They understand that we have to keep this thing connected, from that standpoint, from a social, political standpoint, like the Harry Belafontes, right, who stays connected with us, right, who was the main benefactor behind Beat Street, a lot of people don't know. So that's the way of staying connected. That's the way of keeping this particular generation before it's relevant to a kid. And that's what it is. Like that's all it is. That's the main reason why I sample, because I'm trying to let's keep the sound going, because as much as we listen to music now, especially on mass radio, the soul is leaving. Very slowly. It's leaving. We'll get our Kendrick Lamar's, we'll get our Solange's, we'll get our Anderson Paaks, but they're outnumbered. So the soul is leaving. So we're trying to keep the idea of the chord progression alive, right?
Yeah. And we need to support them. We need to make sure that, those albums do well enough that the industry will fund more like it.
Right.
Prove that there's an audience for them, and it matters where your dollars go. Don't just stream. I was supposed to bring audience questions up here, and I totally left them in the other room. I remember them. I just only remember one person's name, so sorry. Regina, asked if you, what is the one thing a young musician can do to stand out in the crowd because there's just so many. There's just so many. Do you think I'm extrapolating a little bit here, but do you think it's a creative choice? Do you think it's a marketing choice? Do you think it's you got to move to LA? What's the answer?
Just don't be afraid to find your own space. Don't be afraid to not follow the trend. You can be current, but not following the trend at the same time. And I think some kids get that confused. Oh, I got to do what he doing and she. No, you don't.
Find yourself and hold on to that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. The other question, sorry, I'm really sorry, I don't remember your name, but you asked if ninth, how did you learn to mix? How do you practice that?
It's like an everyday thing for me, especially making beats. Is I try to make beats every day if I can, but it's a definite practice. The 10,000 hours of practice thing, it definitely is. But it still has to start with some type of sensibility of music, though.
Right. Well, your records sound different from others. There's the warmth and the depth, I guess.
But even for DJing, it's the same thing. It's definitely a practice. It's a different relationship. I had a different relationship with records than some of my friends did when I was a kid.
Do you do anything? Do you have a routine to practice, or you just do the work?
No, just do the
all
work.
The time.
Do the work.
Yeah. So stay in the studio.
Right.
That's what Ali would like me to tell everybody all the time. Stay in the studio. I think that's all the time that we have. I only remember 2 questions. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
That's messed up. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you to SAG-AFTRA, SAG-AFTRA Sound Recordings. Thank you, the foundation. Appreciate it.